Step 9. Test your thinking by reading the commentaries. A summary of this step. Here's what you're hoping to do at this stage. You're trying to answer your own questions from the text using the commentaries. You're correcting any mistakes that you might have made in your preparation so far. You're exploring new ideas that you've discovered in the commentaries. And you're going to write a running commentary on the passage for use in your sermon. Introduction. A commentary is a book which discusses the background, meaning and message of the Bible text. And here we're going to think briefly about choosing a commentary and using a commentary to help us in our preparation for preaching. First of all then, choosing a commentary. To choose the right commentary, we need to think about 4 main issues. Number 1, the depth and technical difficulty of the commentary. As you look at commentaries, you'll see that there are a number of different types. Some commentaries are written without any reference to Hebrew or Greek or grammar. Other commentaries do mention Hebrew or Greek words, but they transliterate them into English to help the reader who doesn't know the original language. So they write out the Hebrew or the Greek words using the English equivalents. So for example, the Greek word logos would be written out Logos in English. Some commentaries discuss the Hebrew or Greek text using the Hebrew or Greek characters, but they only do it in the footnotes or they do it in the endnotes at the end of the commentary. And then there are other commentaries which discuss the Hebrew and Greek in detail in the commentary itself, assuming that the reader is able to fluently read either Old Testament Hebrew or New Testament Greek, and they're using those languages for their Bible. Now, you know which of those types of commentaries would work for you. I would suggest, though, that any serious preacher should be working with commentaries that at least transliterate the Hebrew or Greek words. That's the first issue. But second issue that we need to think through, whether or not the commentary presents a range of possible interpretations. Some commentators simply state their own interpretation of the passage without referring to other commentators and other commentaries. Some commentaries survey a variety of interpretations, but only at a few key points in the biblical text. And some commentaries are pretty exhaustive and exhausting. They exhaustively survey all of the different interpretations that are possible at various different points in the commentary. Now, it's important to understand at least, I think, the main different possible interpretations of a text before we draw our own conclusions. In other words, if possible as preachers, we should try to use a more technical commentary that really engages with different interpretations and not just one viewpoint. Number 3, the third main issue we need to look at is the theological stance of the commentary. All commentators write from a certain theological position. None of us come to the text as a blank slate. We need to realize that the commentators' theological convictions affect the way that they interpret the text. And so if you're using a commentary, it's important to know where the commentator is coming from, what their theological stance is. particularly in regard to the inspiration and authority of the Bible. Knowing these things will help you to weigh up what they're saying in the commentary. Finally, number 4, we need to take note of the emphasis of the commentary, whether they emphasize exegesis or application. Some commentaries are written like sermons. They're full of illustrations, they're full of applications. So see, for example, the Preaching the Word series by R. Kent Hughes. We might label that type of commentary as devotional commentary or expositions. Whereas other commentaries engage in detailed technical exegesis of the text and they give little, if any, application. To be honest, it's probably useful to have access to both types of commentaries in our preparation. Certainly, we always need to have our congregation in mind as we do our preparation. We need to be thinking about application. We need to be thinking about illustration. By the way, I'm a little cautious about using sermons or expositions in my preparation because it's easy to just simply copy what other people have said in your preaching and not to think for yourself. I once heard a British preacher preach a sermon where he was leaning very heavily on a sermon he'd heard by an Australian preacher. The thing that amused me most was that he didn't just follow the exegesis of this particular Australian, he also unwittingly mimicked his Australian accent. It's important that we do our own text work and we don't just copy others. Well, next, using a commentary. It's essential for us to notice that this is step 9 and not step 1. We must do our own exegetical work first before we read the interpretation of others. It's essential that we come to our own conclusions as far as possible before we get to this step. Reading a commentary is no substitute for careful study of the biblical text. Commentaries should be used to supplement, to add to your understanding, to deepen your understanding of the passage you're reading, and to check out your own conclusions. John Evans, in his book on choosing commentaries, writes this: the use of commentaries, apart from careful study of the text, is to misuse them. Stenger, in his book on New Testament exegesis, suggests that commentaries should be conversation partners and not unquestioned masters. In other words, we mustn't let the commentators lead us by the nose in our understanding of the biblical text. We must think through the issues for ourselves. The main goal of using the commentary is to test your own exegetical work and theological thinking. The first task then is to use the commentary to answer the questions you've generated yourself from your research of the passage. The next task is to correct your wrong thinking, the places where maybe you've misunderstood the passage. And the third task in using your commentary is to look for things that you might have missed in your Bible study so far. If there are any significant differences between our conclusions and those of the commentaries, then we need to go back to the passage and work out why they're different. How and why have the commentators arrived at their conclusions? And why are our conclusions different to theirs? And then once we've weighed the evidence, then we need to decide which of the interpretations we prefer and why. We shouldn't simply assume that the commentaries are always right and we're wrong. And we mustn't make the opposite mistake either and assume that the commentaries are always wrong and we're always right. It's helpful, if possible, I think, to consult a number of commentaries on your passage rather than just one. And this will help you then weigh up what the commentators are saying against one another. Once we've carried out these tasks, then we can write a running commentary on the passage for use in our sermon. So let's just make sure that we've asked all the important questions for this step. Questions to ask ourselves as preachers. Have I answered my own questions from the text using the commentaries? If applicable, have I corrected the mistakes I made in my preparation? Have I explored the new ideas I discovered in the commentaries? And then have I written a running commentary on the passage for use in my sermon?